to dig into those. Under, just to give everybody a heads up, under 9, under the first topic, roles and responsibilities of designated state agencies, there's still some work that needs to be done on that with between staff and a couple of the state agencies. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on that. Sarah's going to give a quick update on where we are, and then we'll circle back to that, table it, and then circle back to it at a next meeting. So with that, just a reminder to the board members, we do have per diem forms. Make sure you get those back into staff if you would. Just quickly on the housekeeping side, bathrooms are down the hall. And what I'd like to do is just go around the table really quickly just for introductions. So folks that are online know they're here. We do have both Mac and Judy who have called in and who are online. So Mac and Judy, I'm going to ask you both not to hesitate to jump in if I don't recognize you or see your hand up. You're very small squares across the room on a big screen. So with that, I'll kick it off. My name is Patrick Kelleher. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Marine Resources and the Chair of the LMF Board.
Amanda Beal, I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry.
Catherine Robbins-Halstead, Board Member in Sears One.
Barbara Trafton, Board Member, Brunswick.
Bob Myers, Board Member, Bath.
Island. Jim Norris, Board Member, Winthrop.
Land for Maine's Future Program.
Commissioner Camuso, Judy, you want to introduce yourself? Make sure we've got good audio.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Judy Camuso, Commissioner of Maine Fish and Wildlife.
Great. And Mac?
Mac Hunter from Amherst, Board Member.
Great. And I do want to just go around the room really quickly, just because we've got a small group and recognize we do have some other people who are online, but we'll start on this side of the room.
Jeff Romano, Maine Coast Heritage Trust.
Catherine DeMonterosian, Chair of Owl's Head Conservation Commission.
Robin White, Owl's Head.
Flora Drury, LMF staff.
Jason Goulet, LMF.
Laura Graham, LMF.
Bethany Atkins, Inland Fisheries and Wildlife.
Liz Petruska, Bureau of Parks and Lands.
Alex Redfield, Bureau of Agriculture.
Great, thank you. I'm trying to see how many people we do have online. Is anybody online would like to introduce yourself? If you're potentially, especially if you're going to intend to ask a question at all during the day. Good, that means we're going to go. That's a good way to do it. Thank you very much. We're going to move right along to item number 2, which is the minutes of the May 24th and the May 26th meetings, which we.
I changed that yesterday.
Did I pull up the wrong slideshow? No, visually.
I don't think so. I don't think.
It's the right year, so you're all right.
You got the right stuff in your board packet.
Yeah.
I move we accept both sets of minutes.
Motion to accept.
Second.
We have a second motion by Roger, seconded by Barbara to accept both sets of minutes. Any questions or comments on this? Seeing none. Are there any objections to accepting the minutes? Seeing none, let the record reflect that all members present, none objected to accepting the minutes. Thank you very much.
Pat, sorry. I do have Bethany noticed just a couple transposed numbers in the agenda, in the minutes. So we should perhaps correct it. I forget, Bethany, can you say which project it was? But the numbers are like 694 once and 649 in the other for purchase price.
May 24th minutes on page 3 under Fox Ledge Appraisal Oversight Committee. In one spot it says 659 and then the next spot it says 695.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And any other, Bethany? So just those. So without objection, those will be accepted. Minutes are accepted with those corrections. No objections. Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Moving right along to item, let's just go item number 3 right into item number 4. So fund balances and then project allocation status. Sarah.
If you can go back one slide. Okay. Just because it's exciting to me, we continue to be spending down those 2009 funds, and I think you will see that CNR balance of 8,675 will be zero by our next meeting. So that's very exciting. When we are doing farmland in September, it's important to remember that we will want to spend these or allocate these funds first, the 174, 238, so that we can fully close out that 2009 bond. 2011 bond, we're under $1 million. And again, I expect to see substantial reduction in those funds by our next meeting as well. And then, yeah, the $40 million is there. You can see we've had one expenditure out of that fund to date, and that was the Kennebec Highlands project that was selected in 10A and closed very rapidly.
Sarah, one thing that I think we all want to keep our eye on is disbursements of the 40 million in the fiscal years.
Yep.
Would it be possible to add a line here, because it's not just, it's when the disbursements were made that make it so critical to our understanding going forward. Would that be possible? just
So
that we
a
can-
column that's just says
Just
fiscal year.
disbursements by fiscal
Yep.
years, so that we can kind of keep our eye on that.
I think that so this spreadsheet is generated by our service center. I will talk to them. I don't think it will be a problem at all, but
Just think it would be helpful.
Yeah. No, that's a good suggestion, Barbara. I think that's, Service Center would be able to break
I
that
should
down.
be able to.
Yeah.
I just don't want to commit them to something you can't do.
Yep,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on fund balance? Seeing none, Sarah?
So next slide, this one will look different because we now have 27 active projects with allocations totaling $8.4 million.
Yes.
That includes all of the projects that were selected under round A and B. We did have several closings since the last time we met: St. George River Water Access, Egamogan Reach Water Access, and the Carter's Wharf Working Waterfront Project. Where fingers are crossed for Mary Needing Park Water Access Project and Bucks Ledge between now and when we see you again. So staff are staying busy with closings. And it's really awesome to see some of those older water access projects off the books.
Yeah, very good.
Man, oh, man.
Okay, any questions on allocations or status? Being none, let's move right along to item number 5, which is Getchell Park. It's Laura Graham is up.
Yes, Getchell Park Water Access. I want to apologize in advance. In your board packet, I referred to the Sherman's Mill Pond. That's a very bad habit. It is Getchell Park. This is an acquisition of a 4-acre, a little over 4-acre parcel on Sherman's Mill Pond with water frontage, with the fishing right down near the village center. And it has been a traditional spot for fishing and this kind of water access for a very long time. It is accessible by Sleepy Hollow Road. There's currently parking there. You can see, you can see my cursor. The parcel is this bit here, and it goes up further. Well, it's this little bit right here, little over 4 acres. And the Appraisal Oversight Committee met on June 28th, and they accepted the appraisal of $85,000. The applicant is requesting $37,500 for their project. But at this point, we're asking for the draft motion is before you to approve the recommendation of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee to accept the appraiser's value of $85,000. And I should note too, for those of you who are probably going to ask, this has been pre-acquired. The $75,000 purchase price, this has been done as in May. So they'll be very happy with the 37.5.
They may be there. Predetermined the board outcome.
That's true. And so I turn it over to you with all humility.
Any questions on Getchell Park? Seeing none, we do have a draft motion on the board.
Make a motion to approve the recommendation of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee and accept the appraiser's value of $85,000.
Second. But we don't, because that is a committee motion, we don't need a second. Any questions on the motion? I'm going to read into the record again. The motion is to approve the recommendation of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee and accept the appraised value of $85,000. Are there any questions? Seeing no questions, are there any objections? Seeing no objections, all the members present are showing no objections, so the motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We announced public notice for the Getchell Park Water Access Project in the Kennebec Journal, and on the Sun, and in the Portland Press Herald and the Sun Journal on July 15th. We have received no comments in response. We have, with great hopes, drafted motion number 2 to confirm the allocation of $37,500 in LMF access to public waters funding to support the acquisition subject to standard conditions.
Thank you, Laura.
So moved.
I'll move to confirm the allocation of $37,500 and LMF access to public waters funding to support the acquisition, subject to standard conditions.
Motion by Roger, seconded by Barbara. Any questions? Seeing no questions, are there any objections to the motion? I'm going to read into the record the motion, and then we'll confirm the allocation. This is a motion to confirm the allocation of $37,500, as Laura suggested earlier, and LMF access to public waters funding to support the acquisition, subject to standard conditions. Again, are there any objections? With all members present, there are no objections to the motion. Motion passes. Thank you very much. We are going to move right along to item number 6, which is Camp Guston, and this is Jason.
This is.
These are not the
This is
slides
not,
that,
hold on, this isn't
I
right.
have.
Okay, hold on. All right, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. No wonder that February 25th thing wasn't changed. All right. Right.
Did we just give the last project too much money?
No.
Jeez. Okay. All right, hold, bear with me. Like you have a job. All right. Oh, no.
You're frozen. That's not good.
Nope, this is not good. Okay. Oh my gosh, it's not even Monday.
What did you do on Monday?
Yeah, well. Yeah. You know, I got my stuff. What do I care, right? All right.
It's actually a ploy to make sure all the funding goes to Laura's project.
Yeah, pretty clever.
All 37,500.
Clever. You know.
Judy, nice to see you at the Audubon gathering on Thursday. Pretty fun.
Yeah.
It was, Roger. It was a nice event.
Was,
Lot of old friends there.
yes.
Okay, you're on the screen.
On the screen, this is a step in the right direction.
Timing is questionable here. Mouth is still moving.
Not. No. Yes, exactly.
B. All this. So. There.
Hey, what?
For those of you online, we had a little, I'm going to call it operator error.
Just say my part, it's whatever.
Yeah, but we'll forgive you this time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So up next is Camp Guston, and Jason.
Yes, and Camp Guston is the first of our round 10B finalists to come back for final award by at least 2 minutes. Until the next one comes. So this is the 95-acre Boy Scout camp on Loon Pond in Sabattis that is being purchased by Androscoggin Land Trust. It'll be open to the public for primitive camping, hiking, and water access to Loon Pond. Accessible by the public Loon Pond Road. This property is right at the end of the public portion of the road. And also backs up onto existing conservation land on Curtis Bog. And one of the conditions, special conditions imposed by the board in the preliminary approval was that there be, before the appraisal was approved, an agreed upon draft MOU between ALT and the Pine Tree Council and Boy Scouts. That condition has been met. They've agreed to an MOU that meets all of the conditions of LMF funding, and BPL and LMF staff have reviewed that. It won't be executed until the closing and also until LMF's attorney has reviewed it as well, when we have an attorney appointed. But in the meantime, there's a good draft in place. And Scotland Land Trust, because the Boy Scouts are very eager to sell this, is going to go forward with the purchase in September. We don't expect that they'll be able to satisfy all the due diligence and standard LMF funding conditions by then. So this will functionally be a pre-acquisition. We will continue to work through the due diligence over the fall and disperse LMF funds when all the conditions have been met. So the next slide. And the appraisal was reviewed by the AOC in June. Land value is $440,000. So we have here a draft motion to approve that appraisal.
Jim?
Yes, I'm pleased to move that we approve the recommendation of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee and accept the appraiser's value of $440,000.
I'll second that. Oh, no, we don't need a second.
Don't need a second. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, I'll just read into the record. The motion is to approve the recommendations of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee and accept the appraised value of $440,000. Is there any objections to the motion? All members present, and showing no objections, the motion passes. Thank you very much. Continue on.
All right. Public notice was posted in the KJ, the Press Herald, and the Sun Journal on July 15th, and we received no public comment. And we had, before we go to the final motion, there is a request to the board from Androscoggin Land Trust. One of the conditions on the preliminary award was that the Boy Scouts only have priority use of the property for no more than 2 weekends of camping. After discussion with the Boy Scouts, they would actually like the board to consider changing that to allow 5 weekdays instead of 2 weekends, not in addition to, so to accommodate a week-long day camp. This would be day use, not overnight use. In terms of impact, the consensus between LMF and BPL staff is it's a comparable amount of time, and because it's during the week and not overnight, it's likely to have less impact on public use of the property. But that's a decision for the board to make.
I like that change myself.
So on the next slide, we have another draft motion, and there's a blank space in there for the priority use space.
I move that we confirm the allocation of $207,500 in LMF Conservation and Recreation funding to support the acquisition, subject to standard conditions and the following special conditions. The MOU for use of the property by the Boy Scouts may have a term of more than 3 years and may provide for priority use of the property by the Boy Scouts on no more than 5 days per year.
Second that motion. Motion by Barbara, seconded by Jim. Any questions or comments?
Do we need to say weekdays?
Yeah,
Weekdays? Yeah.
Yes, you should say
Let me-
weekday.
Let me amend that to say 5 weekdays.
Friendly amendment. We'll accept the, Jim accepts the friendly amendment.
Yes, ma'am.
Catherine?
At the expiration of the MOU, can it then be renewed for another 3 years?
I'm assuming that is the case.
That's, the plan is to have it go forward
There's
as.
nothing that precludes that.
Yeah.
But there would be no, there's no, in the draft, we had this conversation, there's no provision in there for any automatic renewal or anything to that. There's no right to renew. They can just go back to the table and renegotiate it. That was the distinction we made to accommodate the condition that the board put on it.
So we would renegotiate it, potentially renegotiate.
Potentially, right, but there's no, they can renew it, but there's no right to renew it, I guess is what is the important
And
piece.
no automatic renewal.
No, I'm not, yeah, okay. Okay, that's good clarification. Any additional questions or comments? Being none, I'm gonna read this one into the record, and who's keeping?
Tamara is online keeping, she is doing the minutes.
She is, and just for expedience sake, and I think this one does need to be reread. Are you capturing these good enough that we don't need to reread into the record?
I would say that these are also being recorded, so we always have the ability to go back if we
You are
have any
recording,
questions
okay.
about.
Well, if there's
Exactly.
no- I'm gonna,
It is being recorded as well as I'm trying to take notes down as fast as I can.
all right, so on ones like, as long as it's okay with the board, something like this where we're making a modification, I'll reread it into the record, and if not, and it's just clear cut, then just for expedience sake, we'll just continue on. So for this one, I am going to read it into the record, to confirm the allocation of $207,500 in LMF conservation and recreation funding to support the acquisition, subject to standard conditions and the following special condition. The MOU for use of the property by the Boy Scouts may have a term of no more than 3 years and may provide for priority use of the property by the Boy Scouts on no more than 5 weekdays per year.
Does that need to be consecutive in there or not?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No. So are there any additional questions or comments? Seeing none. Are there any objections to this motion? With all members present and showing no objection, the motion passes. Thank you very much. We shall move right along now to number 7. Who's doing this in Flora?
Yes.
Placed, preserved. How are we pronouncing that?
Placed it.
Placed it, preserved.
So Placed Preserve expansion is in the town of Owl's Head. It's 7.14 acres and the town of Owl's Head is acquiring this parcel by fee. The project or the parcel is an undeveloped woodland parcel with pocket wetlands and streams. It would expand the existing Placed Preserve and the existing trail system there. And it's within a 1/4 mile of the Owl's Head Village Center. And on June 28th, the Appraisal Oversight Committee met to discuss the appraisal for this project. The appraisal reported a value of $140,000 and the committee accepted this appraised value.
I had silence to this, I apologize.
And here is a draft motion for you to consider.
I'll move that we approve the recommendations of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee and accept the appraiser's value of $140,000.
Right, this is a committee motion, needs no second. Any questions or comments on the motion? Seeing no questions or comments on the motion, is there any objections to the motion? Seeing no objections and all members are present, the motion passes. Thank you very much. We'll move right along to the second portion of it.
Public notice for the Placed Preserve expansion project was advertised in the Kennebec Journal and the Bangor Daily News on July 15th, 2022. No comments were received.
We have a draft motion to confirm allocation on the board, if anybody would like to make it. Barbara?
I move that we confirm the allocation of $64,500 in LMF conservation and recreational funding to support the acquisition, subject to standard conditions.
Second that.
Motion by Barbara, seconded by Bob Myers. Any questions on the motion? Seeing no questions and no comments, is there any objections to the motion? Seeing no objection by all members present, the motion passes. Fantastic. We're moving right along. Condro, Laura Graham, let's get through this one with no operator error.
Not knocking everybody else out. Okay, all right, fine, I can share. This is the Condro project in Harpswell, 57 acres fee acquisition. These are lands supporting vital ecological functions. This was the major land asset for this project. There is wild honeysuckle present on this property, and it protects the coastal water quality was the prime reason for this, and there is significant match with this project. There's some pictures all up and down this peninsula in Harpswell. The AOC met on June 28th to discuss this project. They accepted the appraised value of $1,750,000. So we have a draft motion here for your consideration.
I'll move to approve the recommendation of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee and accept the appraiser's value of $1,750,000.
Great. Committee motion does not need a second. Are there any questions or comments on the motion? Bob?
Laura, can you just remind us where the match is coming from?
Some of it, a lot of it is actually gifted, what's the fancy word we use for it?
Bargain sale.
Thank you, bargain sale. Yeah, so the seller donated a huge percentage of the land value to this project. And then so LMF's portion would be 250,000. The Harpswell Heritage Land Trust would be posting their own 250,000, and the balance is donor bargain sale.
Good question, Barbara.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? Seeing no other questions, are there any objections to the motion that's on the board? Seeing no objections, all members are present, motion passes. Thank you very much. We're gonna move right along to the second part.
Thank you. We posted public notice for this in the Kennebec Journal and the Portland Press Herald on July 15th and received no comments. So we prepared draft motion number 2.
Roger.
I move we confirm the allocation of $250,000 in LMF CNR funding to support acquisition subject to standard conditions.
Second that one.
Motion by Roger, seconded by Jim. Is there any questions or comments on the motion? Seeing or hearing none, is there any objections to the motion? Seeing no objections and noting all members present, motion passes. Thank you very much. That means we have gone through items 5, 6, 7, and 8 in record time. And this moves us right to item 9 on the agenda, which is board policy.
Before we go there, I want to just acknowledge all the hard work of the AOC in getting all of those appraisals reviewed, and the appraisal community. We've had really good appraisals, and that makes all of our jobs so much easier when we are delivered with really positive and professional reports. So thank you. And before we go on, Jason had just a quick project adjustment that came in late that we just wanted to give you all just a heads up on. No action needed.
Yep. So one of the round 10B finalists was the Great Pond Mountain Wildlands Expansion Project. And the Great Pond Mountain Wildlands Trust is going to go forward with purchasing that land as a pre-acquisition. And then we'll work through all of the LMF conditions following that, and presumably they'll satisfy those conditions, and we will then reimburse them.
It's I think a practice that we're seeing more and more often is pre-acquisitions. Previously, LMF, I would say, strongly discouraged pre-acquisitions. We've taken a more flexible approach, but I think it's one of those things for the board to be aware of. And if you have concerns about that practice, it's something we should we should talk about in terms of our board policies.
My understanding of this case is that the landowner was somebody that they just wanted to lock in rather than make that landowner go through the lengthy process, just.
Can you remind me which one this was?
This is the one, it's east of Bucksport. It's two parcels being added to a much larger.
Oh, yeah,
larger
okay.
reserve.
And LMF funds went in the initial.
Yeah, yeah.
One of them was already pre-acquired when they applied. This is the second smaller parcel
Yeah.
that they have the funds available to close on. They just want to get that done and then work through all of the LMF process.
Catherine.
I don't have any problems with it at all, just as long as they're aware of buyer beware. And they stand
Yeah.
a chance of not being reimbursed, which I'm sure they are fully.
And that's sort
Versed in
of LMF staff standard response is
Yeah.
that you are still subject to all the same board conditions and all those things must be met.
Are they using any bridge people like Conservation Fund?
I think they did on the other pre-acquisition, but then they sold a house lot out of that other piece that I think made them whole, and between that and private fundraising, I think they have the cash on hand to just make this purchase.
That is something we talk about though, that if they're using other public funding or a funder that would have a hook in the title, that all of that needs to be reviewed by LMF staff prior to closing so that we're sure that, debt is being retired at closing, when LMF funds come in, or, there's not a conflict between this funder and our funding. So we cover all of that. I think we do a good job reducing risk to the program, reducing risk to the state, and all the same, standard conditions. It's just a way to acknowledge that some projects will not survive a long closing period.
Barbara.
Like Catherine, I have no problem with them making these acquisitions. It's a matter of balancing risk. And in a seller's market, there's probably a great risk that many properties won't be available or the price will escalate. And so I trust our cooperating entities to make that judicious decision.
Great. Any other questions on this? Appreciate the update from staff. We'll turn it over to Sarah for going through these. The first topic is the DSA issue that I brought up earlier, so we'll kind of slide through this one quickly and then get on to the next ones.
Yep. And I think you probably noticed in your packet that I combined G and H together, just because they're, in my mind, so intertwined, the two issues. It's hard to separate them out and talk about them separately. So I think what we'll do is focus on progress. We'll review what to go to the next slide. I wanted to just, if there are questions from reading the board material, we'll identify those. I think what I want to focus on really is progress made to date. And then just that there are additional topics that still need work, and that those will come back to you once we are a little closer to a resolution. So just as a quick refresher, we had some work group recommendations. This is the work group that was a number of cooperating entities and program partners that Jody Sapphire facilitated, just to remind everyone. Those work group recommendations focused on the role and requirements of the designated state agencies in light of capacity. We can go to the next slide. There, project agreements for fee acquisition projects should be streamlined. Increase LMF program staffing and related states agency support in order to eliminate the backlog of projects and adequately handle those to be created through new bonding. So again, a focus on capacity. So here's where we have consensus. One of the recommendations was to develop a process that enables LMF and DSA staff to understand more details about each project at an earlier stage. Understanding project complexities up front so as to avoid unexpected and time-consuming complications further into the process. So LMF staff and DSA staff have worked to update our LOI form, and you'll see that later in the meeting when we're talking about the next RFP process. This is one of the things we're looking to update in a future workbook.
Do our stakeholders, have they been involved in that process, or is that to come?
We have had some initial work was done during the work group. Angela Twitchell from Brunswick Thompson Land Trust was on that group, and there were a couple of other folks, I forget who exactly. So they were part of the discussion of making that recommendation and part of the discussion of what that could look like or what that might look like. I don't believe they have seen the product that has evolved over months of discussions, the last several months, but it would come for review as part of the workbook. So it would be part of a public review process.
Thank you.
Yep. So project agreements for fee acquisition projects should be streamlined with the goal of reducing workload on both state and cooperating entity staff and minimizing prescriptive language in the PA. This is one where there's additional work that needs to be done before we're ready to recommend anything to the board.
Is it doable?
I think it's a coming to terms on common understanding or definitions. So I think it can when everyone is working with the same knowledge base, same understanding. All right. It looks like Mac has his hand up, just so.
Matt, go ahead.
I was wondering to what extent we have any quantification of the extent of the workload associated with creating the PAs in the first instance, and then all the annual monitoring of management plans and et cetera. I don't doubt that there's a problem, but some quantification of how much labor is going into what aspects by LMF versus DSA staff would seem to be helpful in coming up with a solution. Maybe the committee has dealt with that, but we didn't see anything here.
So I think that's something we could bring back for a future discussion.
Yeah, I think, Mac, that's, in talking with both Commissioner Beal and Camuso, those are exactly some of the points that they need to discuss more thoroughly in-house, and I think we'll be kind of going into those in more depth when they bring back those recommendations. Barbara?
At some place in here, Sarah, I thought you copied the statutory language around establishing management plans and the DSA role. Where did I see that? Was that in here someplace? Anyhow, my point is that sometimes it's good to go back and revisit exactly what the statutory intent was and make sure that over the years that we haven't morphed into more regulation, more bureaucracy than really is necessary if we're following the guidance of the original statute. So I would just put that on the table too, Sarah, that I think revisiting that, and that's part of.
Absolutely. I agree completely. I think we have certainly included that in our lens and can in a future presentation kind of direct the board to this action is tied to this statutory reference. This action is tied to this. So we've done that consistently throughout our process and can bring the board on that journey as well.
And
Saved
just
us.
one other
You saved us.
question,
You'll be all
or
right.
comment
Thank
to Jim's point. I think early outreach to our cooperating entities and members of the work group, and certainly the DSA staff, I think by the time it gets here for public review and our review, I'd like to feel that everyone is on the same page. It's very helpful to me to know that, you know, everything's been vetted and agreed upon before we take our shot at it.
That's what we have been working hard at for the last several months.
And that's exactly the conversation that Commissioner Beal and I had yesterday afternoon as well. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, another topic that needs further discussion, DSAs suggest eliminating or significantly reducing the requirements for ongoing review and approval of cooperating entity management decisions. So this is one that needs additional internal work before it comes to the board. Next slide. Provide a robust scope of project description grounded in and referencing representations made in the application. This would effectively provide the performance standards by which project performance could be evaluated over time without the routine need for a management plan with ongoing review and approval. We have started working on that and have provided you with an example. I think that specific suggestion has multiple pieces. I'm not sure we've accomplished all of those pieces, but we've gotten it to a point where there's at least an offer or an option on the table for us to discuss. Consider a provision in the annual project report, which is currently sent to both LMF and DSA. That includes a brief description of anticipated management actions in the coming year. This would be a way of keeping the state informed without requiring an approved management plan with detailed review and approval requirements. So we have reached consensus on, Laura, knock it off. We have reached consensus on the need to update information reported on the report, but we have not, the consensus on what exactly those pieces are, we have not reached. I think there's general agreement that we could get to that and it could be implemented in 2023. So it's a near-term goal that we could reach. And again, one that needs some additional work, broad conservation objectives should be clear and well described in the PA with opportunities for communication between DSA and cooperating entities on a regular basis, perhaps less frequently than annually. I think that's the part where we don't yet have consensus is on the time frame. And the second part, in place of annual monitoring, the state should consider an audit process to serve the ultimate accountability goal shared by all.
Can you, at least in general, describe what that might be as opposed to a monitoring?
Sure. So in sort of layman's terms, it would be a recommendation to do away with annual monitoring reports. Currently, we have annual monitoring reports and some kind of alternative, it's called an audit process or some other alternative process that would be in place of annual monitoring.
So our annual monitoring, because most of us don't have a feel for it. This is from the cooperating entity, and that's the way it's been for a while.
Forever.
Okay, I
far as
thought
I
we
know.
initiated.
We initiate it in that we remind them and we send them the forms. But in the project agreement, it is the cooperating entity's responsibility to report annually on a form provided by LMF. Okay, so next slide. This one kind of leaks into management plans, but it has to do with the roles of LMF and the DSA. So management plans should not be routinely required in the project agreement. LMF and DSA staff suggests that DSA should retain the ability to require a management plan if necessary. For example, in unusual situations such as special wildlife habitat needs, complex public access arrangements, et cetera. And this recommendation is our current process. So I think there was perhaps some disconnect between members of the work group committee and our actual process. Management plans are required at the discretion of the DSA as a board condition of funding. And when the applicant itself identifies a management plan as a deliverable in their application. LMF does not routinely require management plans. Unless I would say the situation is different in the circumstance of a working forest easement or potentially an ag easement. And I think this can probably wait until a future conversation. This just outlines what the responsibilities are in the project agreement. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about what the DSA responsibilities are. And again, Barbara, I've tied in some of these what the responsibility is to the statutory reference or the bond reference, or, you know, so I have started to do that for you to sort of see like, why do we do this? Well, because this statute directs us to do this. So I don't think we need to go into detail on that at this time. And I think that should cover sort of the high level overview of where we have consensus and where we have some additional work to do.
Great. Mac, your hand's up.
Yes, I didn't anticipate that this was going to be, put forward for, after further staff work. So I went into reading this material fairly carefully and have a number of thoughts and comments. Who should I send those to? I won't take people's time with them here, but I could put them in writing to whoever's appropriate.
I think, Mac, why don't you send them not only to Sarah, but also to Commissioner Camuso and Beal. And then they could share with their staff.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Any other questions on this topic before we move on? Seeing none. Let's go to the next one, Sarah.
We're gonna skip that for now. We'll come back. Barbara, this is where you may have seen some statutory references that just are sort of, as it says, food for thought to think about. We have the statutory language and how do we implement it? That's the crux of the issue. Statutes often aren't so direct that it tells us exactly what to do. There's board discretion in, okay, what rules do we think are appropriate and what, it's a judgment call. How do we ensure that these properties are protected in perpetuity? There are probably an infinite number of different ways, that we could come up to do that. But I will make every effort as we move forward to link practices to statutory guidance. I think we're ready to move on to agenda item I.
Okay. Moving along.
Yes, it's me. Okay. So yes, the last time we talked, I think back in March, we touched on LMF policies and scoring criteria, LMF policies in particular around mitigation funds. And we worked with that. We had a good discussion back in March on what the board thought, how we should think about matching MNRCP in particular, but MNRCP as a poster child for mitigation funds. And then from that, we moved to thinking about carbon credits. We talked about carbon credits too, briefly. And so staff, well, first of all, the board told the staff to research the funding compatibility with MNRCP in particular and come back. We talked, we had a good conversation back in March. I think I covered a lot of this. And then the board adopted in the round 10 workbook, updated scoring systems to award bonus points for projects that demonstrated higher than average contributions. This is what we did for climate resilience, as well as carbon credits and mitigation funds. And the next thing that whoops, I didn't mean to hit this slide. The next thing that the board would need to do, I think, for next steps would be to articulate a policy, a formal policy for LMF's relationship to the development and sale of carbon credits and the use of mitigation funds. And Sarah, well, yeah, here I'll talk about what staff have done. Staff, in response to their charges from the board, have done a lot of research on MNRCP and other state and federal funders. We have spoken with representatives from MNRCP, DEP, and TNC to explore the potential for matching our programs with any given project. We had really wonderful conversations around that. We then expanded the conversation to the AG's office and to council for the TNC to take a look at the MOU. We were tentatively proposing to see how we might capture our cooperation. The progress we've made, we have had a round 10 workbook that incorporated bonus points for the climate resilience that we wanted to see. We created a partner checklist, which you'll see some quick slides on that next, that lays out some of our most common funders or some funders that seem like particularly good matches to show here's the rub, here's what you need to think about. And we created this checklist for other funders, for applicants, for our fellow state agencies. We did draft some prototype decision trees. You'll see these in the next slide to facilitate the board's determination of, to capture what we thought the board's policy was morphing toward. The board would need to determine, is this in fact your policy? And that could then serve as a useful tool in helping the board evaluate, is this a good partnership? Is this a good, a potential partnership with this particular mitigation fund or these particular carbon credits. And the next step for the staff, we believe, is to finalize when we have the clarity, a draft MOU with MNRCP and taking into account council's recommendations. The next slide is pretty pictures of a checklist. So before I go, well, here you go, some pretty pictures of checklist. This is our.
Hold on, Laura.
Sure.
I want to also capture, if you go back, one of the things that we talked about in our meeting with MNRCP and the AG's office was the development of a tool that could be used by applicants to self-screen.
Oh, yes.
Is my project a good fit for LMF and MNRCP? So they're kind of doing a self-screening with input based from LMF and MNRCP. So that we both parties kind of agreed that would be a helpful thing for applicants to be able to answer it. Is this a path I should go down or not? So that's something, in addition to finalizing an MOU, we said we would follow back up on for the September board meeting.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, there's a high degree of cooperation that we're all on the same page, wanting to make this work and make it be sensible and help applicants do that kind of choosing. This is the checklist that has, if this were an actual PDF, these would be clickable. And so it talks about the potential funding partners, some of the classics, Maine Outdoor Heritage Fund being all green, and it's just the easiest possible thing to match. There's MNRCP, that's, and the difficulties with MNRCP aren't really, they're not the administrative type, it's that our programs seek to do very different things. So it's not really a difficulty with us between us as programs, but that we value different things in an application. That became much more abundantly clear. And then, of course, there's NACA, and I'm missing some, I don't know where they go, but there are, yeah, okay. I don't know what happened. Anyway, now we're to the decision tree, mitigation funds decision tree. Before I go into that. Yeah.
Was the prior slide, I don't recall seeing it in my packet.
Is there?
Is it?
On the back. Oh, no, on the, in my packet.
It's in the slideshow.
It's in the
It's in the slideshow.
Yes. Okay, yeah, and this is a
We can
freestanding.
make this brochure available to you. We have it in a format that can be shared. I believe it's on our website, but I'll make sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's more comprehensive in this because this is really, these are the button views, and then there's a little bit more information that people can get from this brochure as they go into greater depth. Any other questions about that? This is the mitigation funds decision tree. I don't know if you can see it well enough up on the screen. And the idea is to capture, we thought from the conversations back in March, what you were really clear about is that you wanted, if you want these funds to be voluntary, you don't want to be obviating the burden of an individual. We don't want to be doing that, but something like MNRCP where it's not an individual thing. Are these regulatory mitigation funds? If they are, yes, that's still okay if it's not relieving a private party's responsibility to mitigate damage. If they're not regulatory mitigation funds, then of course it's okay. Then, we're going to go with regular matching requirements. And so you see this little decision tree. If they are used to relieve a private party's responsibility, then we are thinking from what you told us last time that that's probably not going to be what we want to do. If they're not, if they're pooled as MNRCP is, it's sort of this program that deals with this, then is the mitigating entity required to expend these funds on this particular resource with or without matching funds? If no, then it's really not a problem. We are already taking care of, there's this idea of additionality that you all expressed last time, that we want our LMF funds to be acquiring something that otherwise might not be acquired. And so that's taken care of. If the answer is no, if those people aren't required to do this, then we're helping acquire something that otherwise wouldn't be available to our public. If the answer is yes, then we get really explicit about that additionality. Would we be protecting a piece of this or some of this resource that isn't something that the mitigating entity would be protecting? So for MNRCP, for example, is there open space or are there rare or threatened wildlife, or is there something that LMF is acquiring that MNRCP maybe wouldn't prioritize, that we can prioritize? We can say we're getting something extra for our contribution. And if the answer is yes, then at the end of this ziggy-zaggy decision tree, then we think you're telling us that makes these funds compatible with LMF. If the answer is no, we believe we understood you'd be saying that maybe it's not a good match. It's not how we want to use our funding. So that's reading what you shared with us back in March.
And so the intention of this is a discussion, not a decision. We're looking for your feedback so that we can continue to tweak this and make it better and to the point where it's a useful thing to you. So.
Mac.
I'm not 100% sure of when you say these funds in the first couple of boxes, are you talking about match funds coming into, sorry, my phone's ringing. Are you talking about funds that would be coming as match funds for an LMF proposal? There are times where it seemed like you might actually be talking about LMF funds, and other times it seemed like you're talking exclusively about match funds.
I see. Yeah, no, the intent is that these are talking about match funds from some entity that does this mitigation work. That's what these funds were meant to be. These funds that are matched to an LMF, proposed match to an LMF project, but these proposed match funds come from an entity whose mission is to provide mitigation funds, to mitigate damage done elsewhere, right?
Okay, but let me give you an example in referencing the second one. Are these funds used to relieve a private party's responsibility to mitigate damage caused elsewhere?
Right.
What if that other party is, I mean, it's not a private party, maybe it's the main DOT.
Right.
And we could do something additive to funds available through them.
Right.
But if you go up through the yes, you say, no, we can't do that.
Right. And that's where I'd say that would be our definition of not a private party. That's how I would read that. That's exactly where we want to be able to match. We'd say BPL is not a private party. We'd say MNRCP is not a private party. It's not, I don't want to pick on a corporation. It's not an individual private entity.
That was the gist of what Catherine was kind of saying.
That's right.
We don't want to be
enabling
mitigating a private business owner or private entity's mitigation needs.
Right. And so if that concept sits well, that's great feedback. If that concept doesn't sit well, that's great feedback.
Any other questions for Laura? I think conceptually, the idea of having a better path forward and how these dollars will be used is really important. I'm a poor, I'm gonna, full disclosure, I'm a poor board member of the MRRC pre-program because usually my staff sit there, but we've had conversations around these funds in the past, and is there other dollars available for other projects? So to me, having these things linked is gonna be really important moving forward. So this is good work. Thank you.
And now we're carrying the same kind of, well, I can see if it clicks too easily or not enough. Okay. We have the same kind of thinking with carbon credits. Was that a noise I need to pay attention to?
No.
Okay.
Keep at it. You don't,
All right.
don't push any buttons.
All right. So, we did look at the governor's task force report. We tried to build on the work and building on some of the same thinking from our conversations back in March. First of all, the threshold consideration in the first box you see, are these carbon credits exchanged in the voluntary market? This has been the line we've drawn in our previous, with our previous agreements, when we submit these, this has been the sort of the threshold. Are they voluntary? If they're not voluntary, we've said we won't, when LMF staff has had to figure out what to do in a given situation, this is where we've drawn the line, provisionally drawn the line. And if no, then we'd say they're not compatible. If yes, and this decision tree zigzags up and forth, up and down, because I didn't want to have to rebuild this tree. So they zigzag. So if yes, they are voluntary, then, and this second box pulls it really right out of the governor's task force. Do they meet an approved standard that includes third-party verification and evidence that purchasers have executed a plan to reduce their emissions? It's that last piece too that is going to be more restrictive, I think, in the coming years. That's going to be a piece, but I understand that more and more of these markets are looking to investigate that, and that was, I highlighted in the governor's task force. This was a thing that the state should consider. So I put it in there for you to consider. And if no, then it's not compatible. If yes, then now we're starting to talk about the impact of this work and these efforts on our project, our direct interest. Would the practices used to generate these credits be consistent with the practices required for the management of the LMF project? If
So this is, and we're really probably going to be seeing this on working forest easements. You know, that's the likely applicant. And so that's the reference in your mind to, when we talk about management of the LMF project, it's probably a working forest project, maybe a community forest project. But
that's right. And if these practices or these efforts are not consistent with the management of our projects, then we'd say, no, it's not compatible. If it is, then would the development of these credits impact the conservation purposes of the LMF project? So first we look to see if the management plans would be impacted. We don't like that. And then we look to see if the conservation purpose, and I suppose you could flip these just as easily. It doesn't, I don't have any, you know, it'd be fine. But whether they impacts the development, impacts the conservation purposes and values of the LMF project. If no, then you're probably in the clear. And if yes, you're probably not. Yes, sir.
Using the term impact there,
Yep.
do you mean negatively or positively?
That's a really good
'Cause
question.
it could be a positive impact.
That's true. That's true. That's a really good question. That's good to clarify.
maybe it is conflict with.
Yeah.
Something
Yeah,
to clarify
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's better. Thank you. And that's all I have for pictures. Sarah, is there anything else you wanted to?
No, and just that, I hope you will take time to think about this for a future decision-making discussion. It's we're putting our best guess out there, our best effort. It's not an area where we have a lot of expertise. We're trying to create something that is practical and supports existing state policy. And we're looking for input from you all as to how well we've done.
Yeah, and I think I may have mentioned this at the last meeting, but this task force, I actually co-chaired it. And one of the things that came out of it is a position that is going to be filled in the Forest Service. And it will be somebody who has some carbon market expertise, so.
Yes, I saw the position posted.
Yeah, it actually came back down because it
Oh.
was missing, so. It's going back up this week.
Patty knows that, that we're interested in getting some
Yeah.
valuable expertise from that
Good.
person.
All right, then.
Could I jump in?
Yeah, please, Mac.
I understand in the middle bullet, the need for having that to make sure that this does not conflict with the working forest sorts of easements. But I want to make sure that in the case of a project that might be funding an ecological reserve, there would be no conflict there either, in the sense of that it's possible for ecological reserve-based projects to also generate carbon credits. Am I correct in that assumption that this constraint only would apply in terms of working forests, but not with ecological reserves?
I think the standard would be the same,
Yeah. Yeah,
regardless of,
whatever that standard is,
yeah.
we want it to be the same, right?
Yep. Does that make sense, Mac?
The standard being that it just not be that in this case, in the case of an ecological reserve, the practices required would be for it being managed as an ecological reserve without timber harvest.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
It would
okay.
be inconsistent, yeah.
That's fine.
Sarah, we ever funded an ecological preserve?
Yes, we have.
And how do we handle the requirements for public access and hunting and fishing and so forth?
Yep, the ecological reserves that we have funded are held by BPL. And the BPL has their sort of framework for how they manage those properties. And the one that kind of comes to mind for me was part of the Orbit and Stream Crocker Mountain area. So a portion is under ecological reserve, a portion is not. They're managing multiple uses and multiple management mandates, so.
So it was a mixed use property. It wasn't.
In that instance.
exclusively a ecological preserve.
Yeah, in that instance, yes. I can't recite it for all of the ecological reserves that we funded, but my experience has been that recreation is not necessarily precluded, it's just managed. So there may be pedestrian use within a very defined trail corridor, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah, there's no restraint on hunting and trapping in ecological reserves, and they are open to the public. It's just that the trails and such are treated a little differently.
There is an increased interest and availability going
Right.
forward to invest in ecological preserves. So
Right.
I was wondering.
Yep. Yes, it's one of our late pack priorities is ecological reserves. So absolutely eligible for LMF funding.
Catherine.
Carbon credit funds, who owns the funds then if they're sold on an LMF easement? Does it go back to the landowner? Does it return to program?
That's a really good question. We have negotiated a couple of different scenarios. We've really only participated in 2 projects where we've allowed the sale of carbon credits on a non-regulatory market. And the first one was between Coastal Mountains Land Trust and the Water District, the main water company. So a somewhat unique landowner. They're there to manage the land for water quality. You know, that's their bottom line. It's not timber harvesting. And in that instance, they negotiated an arrangement where the landowner and the land trust would share in proceeds. And that's a simplification, but that's what it resulted in, is sharing proceeds. With Cisladopsis, I don't believe there was a sharing of proceeds. Do you remember, Jason?
No, that one, I think it was the landowner in that case is Down East Lakes Land Trust. And the land trust would just be receive the proceeds, I think.
So we're open to figuring that out. I think LMF has less of a stake in it, and we have let the landowner and the land trust kind of negotiate those terms. I think that's something the board could decide. If you have a strong preference for those proceeds to go somewhere, you could make that a policy issue.
No other questions, we'll move on to stewardship.
I think just with the last agenda item, if you have time and you've absorbed some of these details later on and you want to send us comments, please do. We'll take them and bring it to the next level.
All right, are we ready? Okay, I want to preface this by saying that much like the DSA and project agreement discussion, this is an update. It's not ripe for the board to make a decision. There's more work that staff needs to do to tee it up for the board for a board discussion at a later date. But this goes back to the March board meeting when we presented a draft of policy for awarding LMF stewardship funds, and that was followed up on June 28th by a stakeholder meeting with board members, DSA staff, and members of the land trust community. And using that draft policy as a starting point. And in your board packet, there's a memo that shows the full policies that were discussed and where there was consensus, with the caveat that, two caveats. One being that just because there was consensus at that meeting, or seemed to be consensus at that meeting, does not mean that it is policy. It needs to be discussed and adopted by the LMF board. And there may have been disagreements that just weren't raised at that meeting. I did learn after that meeting, after I wrote the memo, that there was some disagreement about match and whether excess purchase match could count as match for stewardship, even though, so there may not be an event consensus there. And that will all, be discussed by the board at a future meeting. But two topics that I did want to call to the attention of the board. One is that there's a disagreement just in terms of what restrictions the board should put on the spending of the LMF award versus preserving it as principal, or whether the board should put any specific restrictions on the spending of the principal, or just rely on Maine's endowment statute and the recipient's investment endowment policies to govern the spending of that stewardship endowment. That's an area in particular where we need to do more research on what policies different groups have, and also talk to the AG's office about what's appropriate to comply with the endowment statute, which we're not tremendously familiar with, and also what's appropriate to implement our new statute. The other area where there was some discussion was the award amount. I think there was a pretty good consensus on the work group that, especially on small projects, 5% of the LMF award was not going to be a meaningful amount in terms of endowing the long-term stewardship needs of a property. And even on large ones, it's not likely to be really fully fund stewardship. So after the meeting, we put together, ran some numbers on some different options, and those are on the next slide. So three options that we looked closely at. Well, one for comparison was just our current set asides of 5% of the LMF award. And we also looked at just going up to 5% of appraised value, or a sort of scaled option of 5% of the first $200,000 and then 2% over that. And the reason for the cap of 25,000 is just to keep that from becoming very large awards and making it so the LMF funds weren't available to fund acquisitions. And the reason for switching to appraised value versus the LMF award is there was a sense that projects that brought a lot of match to the table and requested a very small amount of money for LMF might have been disadvantaged in terms of the amount of stewardship money they were eligible for. So going to appraised value sort of levels that playing field.
Tundra is a good example.
Tundra is a good example, yes.
The value is very high, but the LMF award is very little, so.
So I think there was not a full consensus, but a general preference for that third option there that increases the amount of money that smaller projects are eligible for stewardship. But because of that cap of 25,000 on the total stewardship award, the net impact on the amount of money that LMF sets aside for stewardship and therefore on the amount of money that LMF has available to fund acquisitions is not, is pretty minimal. Using the round 10 projects as sort of a hopefully representative sample. There was also a sense, this is just sort of on LMF staff in the office, that when this board revisits this discussion, consider whether it should be kept the same for access improvement grants, because a lot of these award amount considerations apply to those awards as well. So again, not asking for a decision, just food for thought for now. Yes, Jim.
It seems that even with that change, that small projects could be disadvantaged.
By statute, we can't give them more than 5% of appraised value. So anything under 20,000 is getting as much as we can legally give them in that scenario.
Okay.
So Jason, you are going to have a conversation with the AG's office about the endowment statutes, because it was during the last, I did not raise it. I did mention it to Sarah. It was not clear to me that we need to, for our process, follow that statute. So we need to make sure that what we're doing is actually linked to full.
Yeah, I think that's that's a good question to ask their opinion on.
Yeah.
Whether the use of the word endowment in our statute means that we need to follow that.
Exactly. That's the clarity I think we need. I mean, it may very well, but as I was reading it during that meeting and going back and forth, it wasn't crystal clear to me.
Right. And then I think the follow-up question would be, even if we're not required to, do we want to? This is a matter of good policy.
That's kind of the point that Sarah had to me, and it sounds like you're really drilling down on some good consensus here. So that's really what I think the most important thing is.
Yeah, I think it's once we have these, go to the next slide, Lloyd. There's a handful of sort of interagency questions we need to sort out. That's being one of them. And also just some consultations, but with procurement and treasurer's office about process on the just general contracting and mechanism of getting the dollars out the door, and then how to handle awards to state agencies, whether that money would be held by the state in some account or go to some group like Maine Community Foundation to hold on behalf of the state, and just what those different options might look like. So I think after we've had those discussions, we'll be in a good place to potentially come back to the board. We may at that point, we'll take stock and decide whether we need to reconvene the work group, or if there are a relatively small number of board policy type discussions that we should just come straight back to the board.
Right. The idea is recommendations will come back to you all.
Yeah.
And I would just suggest it would be good to run all the recommendations, even if we don't have a formal meeting of the working
Sure.
group.
Yeah.
That we all need to see it before and agree to it before it comes to the board.
Matt.
Yes, a couple observations. One is that the cost of stewarding a new project often has significant upfront costs of developing trails and parking areas, kiosks and things like that. And the taking an endowment approach to this is there's an issue there. I'm not sure what the resolution is, but.
You also make access improvement grants, Mac.
Well, yeah, I forgot about those. Good point. Also, in another document, this draft project agreement, there was language about the 50% of any income from carbon sales going to the dedicated endowment associated with the premises. And although the word stewardship endowment wasn't used there, I suspect maybe that was intended. It did occur to me that carbon sales could add up to be fairly significant, and there may be times where the logical use for any income associated with the property would be to buy more adjacent property as opposed to maintain trails.
Yeah, Mac, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, any relationship between the draft project agreement and this stewardship policy is coincidental, I think.
Yeah, I think the example you're thinking of, Mac, was exactly what was negotiated by Coastal Mountains Land Trust, and we described that in a previous conversation. So it was tied to carbon credits, but it's a good example of how you could raise stewardship funds. So separate but related.
It's in the draft revised project.
Oh, gotcha.
But I don't think we had specifically looked at stewardship policy in that draft revised project agreement.
Yep.
So there's still more work to be done there too.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mac. Any other questions on stewardship funds? Jim?
One of the land trusts that I'm involved with, fortunately has involvement with a large number of properties. And so that the stewardship funds are generally paid by the cooperating entity, but are pooled and provide a much greater benefit because of that pooling. And if it hadn't been that way, and I think about some of our small ones, that we had a violation, a clear cutting violation that required legal work and, fairly significant expenditure. It was coincidental that it happened to occur right up front. How does that concern relate to some of our, like our small projects where stewardship fees are in part used for defending the easement?
That is a topic that this group needs to discuss further. It was discussed in the initial group in terms of the concept of LMF funds, LMF's contribution being held in a dedicated, sort of line item, but that the match could potentially be part of the pooled funds, or should the match be in that LMF, sort of line item. How we handle that match is still needs resolution, but for exactly the reasons you're bringing up. It might be more beneficial for a small land trust to have their match occur in their pooled funds because it gives them flexibility. Whether or not, I think, my sense is the state will have some opinions about that, and we'll have to kind of see where it lands out, but you should be on the committee, Jim. You're bringing the thoughts that, have been discussed.
No good deed goes unpunished.
And Jim, you're exactly right that that's a good practice in the land trust world, and one that a land trust I've worked with have followed. By statute, the LMF funds can only be spent on the project on the property receiving LMF funding. So they can't be put into a pooled account, and that's why we're talking about a separate line item.
But the match has flexibility potentially. So do we build in that flexibility? Something yet to be resolved. You're on the right track.
I'm not advancing the slide until someone tells me.
Any further discussion? That way we.
Seeing no other hands, let's advance the slide and go to the next topic. Item number 10,
Okay, I wanted to get you all thinking about our next RFP. It may feel like it's a ways away, given that we've just wrapped up sort of the last one, but for staff to plan ahead and get things to where they need to be for you, we need to start working on it. So there are a number of things we know we would like to accomplish. We've discussed sort of improvements to the workbook that could be made before the next RFP. And just how extensive the changes are will impact the timing for our next RFP. So it's, if we had unlimited staffing and unlimited time, we could do all the changes that we want to do. And it's just looking to you all to determine what kind of balance you're thinking about. So things that we feel we can do in a relatively quick turnaround. As we discussed a little earlier in the meeting, update that LOI and project sponsorship details. Incorporate board adopted changes to the appraisal process. You'll recall we looked at that earlier in the year. It was a work group recommendation and the board accepted those recommendations. Stewardship fund guidance. We'd like to get stewardship wrapped up before the next RFP, and we think that's a possibility. And then scoring cleanup, not an overhaul. We know that we can remove the scoring preference for easements, refine scoring criteria for public water supply, refine scoring criteria for climate, carbon, and resilience, and revise the preference for project readiness if that's a board desire. Those are relatively easy fixes that could be done. More difficult and time consuming would be an overhaul of the scoring process. Changes in roles or elimination of the designated state agency, substantive changes to the project agreement, and substantive changes to the working forest easement template. And all of these things are reflected in either board comment or work group recommendations. That's where this list comes from. So it would be helpful to get a sense from the board where you're leaning towards. Yeah.
Why would you want to remove scoring preference for easements? That to me gives you more bang for the buck. I prefer.
I think there's just not consensus among the board. There are some board members who feel like that scoring criteria is not useful, and then there are others who do feel it is. So I think it's just one of those.
Wouldn't that reflect then in their individual scoring of the projects? They then would score those lower, and that would be in the scoring discussion.
Well, except that our scoring criteria gives you 5 points if you're an easement and no points if you're a fee project without municipal sponsorship or support. So it's a relatively small number of points. And I think there just needs to be discussion on, do we keep them? Do we not keep them? Do we eliminate it? I think it just is how important is this?
Personally, I would like to see it stay in because I think it's beneficial to have an easement over fee ownership. You keep the land in the tax base, you get more bang for your buck. I'm also wondering why you'd want to revise preference for project readiness. I know that's something that we talk about a lot. So I think, to me personally, I'd like to see the project readiness also stay in, just because we want projects to be ready when they come.
Yep.
So.
It was something that we enhanced for round 10, changed for round 10. And so I thought it would be a good discussion. Do we want to keep this project readiness enhancement or can we dial it back to where it used to be?
I don't want to get into an extended discussion of this, but I'm thinking of a lot of the projects that we had in our past round. They didn't have a choice whether they would get an easement or whether they would go forward with a fee purchase. And so, I think it's worth considering whether some of the projects could be disadvantaged if we didn't have enough funds simply because they had no choice, But to the bigger question here about scoring, even though some of these look simple, we've already discovered that maybe they're not so simple.
I chose the simple ones.
And might benefit from kind of a working group to look at these. And I've been concerned that we haven't really revised our scoring in about 25 years.
Yeah.
And so maybe there are some front end things that we can accomplish. I certainly don't want to hold up a RFP, going forward. But would it make sense to put this in the context of a working group so that we could identify those that we have some agreement on, present those to the board, but then begin to really do the kind of systematic look at all our scoring? Seems to me we need to start on it, and I don't want to hold up the RFP until we finish it. But I think rather than piecemeal it again and just identify a few things, I think it's time to. I hate new committees, Mr. Chairman, but I think.
Yeah, I think you really run the risk of delaying an RFP with the work group right now, based on the timing that we're talking about. However, there's going to be more RFPs, right? So maybe we need to eat this elephant one bite at a time, work on kind of the simpler components of this, and then really talk about, identify the areas. Some of them are already identified, scoring being one. We did make some changes to scoring several years ago, but those are some of the pieces that are coming out now for discussion, right? For other reasons. So,
It might be useful, Laura, if you go to the next slide, we have a timeline.
Mac also has his hand.
yeah, Mac, we'll go to you before we talk about the timeline. Mac?
Yeah, well, actually, much of what I was going to say would just echo what Barbara said. I raised my hand at the beginning of what she was saying, and yeah, I think personally, I would say we don't need a major overhaul of the scoring system, but it's more than a few tweaks. So I would like, I guess, a compromise position would be maybe a committee that meets once for a long day and gets as far as it can on low-hanging fruits, but doesn't necessarily have to come out with all the answers completed at the end of a session.
I think that approach certainly would be a little bit easier than kind of an extended work group that's going to need to meet, report back, and then meet again potentially, and utilize that approach to bring some additional little more than tweaks back to the board.
And I guess I'm totally not wanting to hold up an RFP.
Yeah.
However, I think the tweaks that we're going to make will benefit from a discussion of a broader group here. And I think, it can be, maybe we start with an initial meeting. May require some additional meetings to really take a look at all the scoring criteria. In no way should we hold up an RFP, because that's what our main work is, to get the funds invested.
I think if we took the approach that Mac just laid out, it will identify whether we need to have a more formal working group moving forward. Right?
So is Mac suggesting the whole board for a day to go over scoring, or that it's a subgroup?
I'm hoping a subgroup.
That's what I'm thinking.
Mac, I believe you meant subgroup.
Yes.
So if we could, I certainly would be willing to take volunteers to create a subgroup, both from members of the board and some of our partners. We could keep this fairly informal, and if you have willingness to serve, both members of the board and outside entities, then make your names known to Sarah. And we try to schedule a day as quickly as we can.
So if we can go to the schedule.
Segue.
Exactly. This is just floating ideas kind of proposal. We have projects. You all are about to engage in another sort of proposal reviewing and scoring process. It will be many fewer projects, but still a more intense workflow between now and September. I would like to think that this subgroup could potentially meet in October, have recommendations at the November board meeting. And then very quickly, board discussion, this is what we like, this is what we don't like, staff take it back. And by mid-December could issue an RFP. I've floated this schedule with the DSAs, and the kind of dates and timeframes seem to work okay with them and their workflow. So it would be mid-December RFP, LOIs. We'd have an extended, recognizing we're kind of in holiday season, we'd have an extended LOI, and then proposals due May. And rather than doing July back-to-back meetings, do it in June, and maybe give the board July and August off. And stuff. And stuff. So that's the current thinking. Working waterfront and working farmland weren't quite ready to put together a 2023 schedule, but they are thinking about it, and I think could come up with a recommendation in September or November.
My only suggestion would be a September, maybe have this little bit more informal work group meet sooner than October. I just have an aversion to any meetings in October being a grouse hunter, so that could be driving my comment, so.
I think it may be driven by who volunteers and
True,
trying to coordinate schedules.
true.
I think, yeah, and I am definitely balancing, staff are wrapping up multiple other subcommittee meetings, and so I am
Yeah.
100% certain we can find a date that works for all.
Okay. Mac,
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I forgot to take it down.
oh, that's okay.
We don't, this is, we do not have to make a decision here. This can wait till September. I wanted to float it to get people's thoughts, and we can continue to refine it and come up with a final schedule by September.
That's good.
Seeing the working waterfront and working forest, we had a closing date recently. How much did we get? What?
You are ahead of the agenda. Hold on one second.
Next agenda. Okay.
It sounds like we have general, okay with this concept, and folks will get in touch with me who want to be on a subcommittee to look at scoring changes, and we'll look for a date to meet and plan to bring suggestions back to the board as quickly as we can.
Great. Okay. Then let's move on to Working Lands RFP update. First up is Working Waterfront, and Deidre is here from DMR.
Good morning, everyone. So just to let you know where we currently stand with the Working Waterfront Access Protection Program. The last time we had asked for applications was back in 2018. So we solicited applications beginning this past February, in February of 2022. We started with letters of interest. We got 11 applications or letters, I guess, of folks who were intending to apply or potentially interested to apply. Only 2 of those were not good candidates for this particular program. So there were 2 that we didn't encourage, and then 9 that we did. Out of the 9 that we encouraged, DMR and LMF and CEI started working with those potential applicants beginning in that spring of 2022. And at the end, the applications were due in June, beginning of June of 2022. And we ended up getting 5 applicants. So there were 4 entities or businesses that decided not to advance. Just briefly, I would say, I think that's a combination of either the timing just wasn't quite right for those particular projects as of the beginning of June. And then the other thing, I think there were a couple of them that just through the process of coming to understand what putting a covenant on the property actually entailed, they decided that it wasn't something they were interested in doing. So we did end up with 5 strong applicants. The review panel met on July 13th, including Roger, who has been a participant in this process from the very beginning and is now kind of the LMF representative on the review panel. So the 5 projects collectively, if you combined their total request, it was actually over $7 million in a request. But that's because one of the projects was actually $6 million alone. We had basically $2 million available to make allocations. So the review panel met and discussed this for about 3 hours, and ultimately they valued all of the applications. Just realistically, there wasn't enough money to fund the one that was very expensive. We could afford to fund the remaining 4 projects, so they did recommend advancing those or recommending those to the commissioner for allocation. So we are prepared to bring those recommendations to the LMF board at the September 27th meeting, and we're just preparing the documents so that you guys can get the summary of the attributes of these particular projects. But it went pretty smoothly. There is kind of that, we did kind of have a challenging situation where we have this very expensive covenant and we're trying to figure out the path forward on that. I'm happy to answer any questions if it's helpful.
Complicated is an understatement.
Yeah.
But really good work. The dialogue and the consideration and deliberation was really wonderful.
Is that more expensive project totally, done? Or are there other configurations of it that might be fundable in a future round?
Yeah, that's a good question. So part of the challenge with this particular proposal is nobody really knows what this covenant is going to cost. And historically, we've had this rule of, it's going to be between 25 and 50% of the appraised value of the property is what we would spend on the covenant. In this instance, it is a really complicated property. They want to retain the ability to do some other, to use the property in some other existing ways. There's architects and other businesses on the property that they'd like to be able to continue to do. So at the end of the day, the review panel really said, we need to get an appraisal and find out what this covenant is worth. And it's really hard to move anything forward until we know the answer to that question. We had talked with the applicant about many different approaches in terms of only putting a covenant on part of the property, doing it in phases, doing it, over time. And the property owner felt pretty strongly that they wanted to put the covenant over the entire property and they wanted to do it all at once. So given those desires, we really kind of, again, reverted to the idea that we need to know what the covenant is going to cost us and then figure out a way, if there is a way, to actually purchase that covenant.
Then the other 4, will there be a significant balance left over of the 2 million after those 4 are done?
So we're using the 25% as a placeholder for the value right now. Obviously, all of those properties are actually going to get appraisals and find out what the covenant is worth. A lot of them are actually in kind of in the mid-coast, located in the mid-coast. So we have been talking about the fact that there's a strong possibility that when an appraiser does the value of the covenant, it's very possible it's going to be above 25%. It could be closer to 50%. So I think we could be spending what we have available, which is the $2 million. I don't think that we're going to be, spending less than what we have at the end of the day. But they have to go through that exercise. Just using the 25%, I think we're at 1.2 million.
Something like that. I think with set asides, we had maybe 500,000 left over just using the 25%.
Right.
But yeah, we have some properties with some significant likelihood of very much more significant value.
Right. Yeah, I don't think it'll be just the 25% for all of them like it has been historically.
The 25% rule was designed for those instances in which highest and best use was commercial working waterfront, so that there was no, I don't need to explain this to you, Jim, so there was no difference between the covenant value before and after. And that doesn't describe a lot of the properties that we have.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks, Deirdre. You guys.
Next up is working farmlands. She changes.
My stuff, what do I care?
Working farmland.
Sure, that's me. Good morning, everybody. It's okay. There's nothing on there that I need. So this is the first offering of the Working Farmland Access and Protection Program. Submissions of complete projects was at 5 p.m. yesterday, so just hot off the press. We had 4 letters of inquiry submitted in April, and 3 of those projects continued to full submission. Jason and I have done some site walks and scoped out the properties and excited about their potential candidacy for the program. The total ask with those 3 applications is just under $100,000, so within the allocated funding for this round. Our review panel is almost done, some finishing touches on a little more participation, and then the panel will meet before the end of August. Make recommendations to Commissioner Beal, and then before you all in the September LMF meeting. That's the update.
Great. Any questions? Jim?
May I volunteer to serve on the review panel?
Talk to Amanda.
We had talked about having an LMF board member, and I don't know that we made a decision, but it
Yeah.
was something we had talked about.
I think ideally we want a board member. We would welcome more than one. I know I also had inquired as to whether Barbara was interested, but I think if you both were interested, we would absolutely make
Definitely.
space for and welcome your participation. And you don't have to answer right now. I'm not putting you on the spot.
I also know, I mean, being Laura in my kitchen on a computer screen, like every other day with the work on Working Waterfront, that relationship from LMS staff too, I don't know if you guys have built that yet, but between board representation and the staff components, it really makes the process really strong and good. So just shout out to Laura for all the work you did on Working Waterfront. So I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
It might be a possibility to have an alternate. In other words, when you,
Go ahead.
no. When you begin to try to arrange schedules and find out who's available, I think it's nice to have a board member, but, maybe Jim is available when everyone else is available, or maybe I'm available. So I'm totally, no. I think put us both down and let's see who's more available, because timeliness is important here.
Sure, happy to coordinate.
Great. Okay.
Laura is our Working Forest representative.
Yeah, so very brief update on the Working Forest proposals. We received just over $5.8 million in requests submitted by both state agencies and nonprofits.
So we'll be looking at like,
How many?
yeah,
How many
what,
projects does that represent?
well, we're still figuring that out. It's a bit complicated. And we'll keep you updated.
And Working Forest would come in under community conservation.
CNR funded, conservation recreation funding. Some of them will be statewide significant and some of them will be community conservation projects.
Originally, you were thinking they were going to be up to closer to 7, right? Am I remembering that
We
correctly?
did have, so we've had some projects not come forward that we thought. We've had some projects that were going to be one parcel that are now two parcels. So things have morphed a bit.
That's better. It looks like we'll be better on funding than originally we were concerned that there wasn't going to be enough.
Are they
I
all,
think we're gonna be, well, that's something we'll look at. I think we are bumping the edge.
are they all easements?
No. Not all easements.
I'm just curious, did did LMF put any money into the FSM Coburn Gore project?
We did not. FSM did contact us and vetted, would LMF be a good funding source? And through that conversation and the landowners' desires and some of it was complicated by the border station. There were a number of reasons why public funding might not be the best funding for that particular project. But we did have a good conversation about it.
Okay. Any questions on the updates? Seeing none, staff updates.
Just briefly, I'm disappointed to tell you that after posting our paralegal assistant position 3 times, we do not have a paralegal assistant. And the ball is in my court to take that to the next step. The idea is to potentially reclassify it to a different job description and get that posted sooner rather than later. And also a little bit disappointing note, we've been busy. We've been really busy, which means our work on Wise Hive has not progressed as quickly as we would like. The goal is to have some staff time really focused in August and potentially even into September to move us further along with that. I'm concerned about the timing of getting that application up and running and tested and vetted in time for our next RFP. That is still a wishful goal, but it's becoming feeling a little less achievable than it was 6 months ago. So going to keep working on it. We do have an AOC meeting scheduled for August 9th, and for AOC members present, we do have appraisals that will be coming to you for that meeting. We know that there are other projects out there that have sort of said we're expecting to have an appraisal we're expecting, so we may want to look at adding in early September if those do come to fruition. And then the next board meeting is September 27th, and the primary focus of that board meeting is going to be approve appraisals and help projects move forward and accept new projects. We will kind of take a break from some of the policy discussions so that we can focus on those RFPs and projects.
Great. The paralegal, we had to do the same thing with DMR, so we've got language if you need it for communications. So, yeah.
Good to know.
Just give me a shout.
Yep.
Any other, Barbara?
We adjourn.
That was easy. Great. So moved. Thank you very much, everybody. And you got me out of here with 4 minutes.
You couldn't find it better.
See everyone.